The ancient ship had waited 10,000 years for royal blood. Then, before the entire alien court, it ignored the queen, opened its command bridge, and chose a human soldier standing at the back of the room. Rifles lifted. Nobles froze. But he did not reach for power. He looked past the throne, saw a child standing beneath a failing brace, and said, "Your ceremony's about to drop 80 pounds of metal on that kid. Welcome to gravity and Stardust. I hope you enjoy this video and have a day filled with happiness." Now, let's begin the story. The first thing Sergeant Daniel Hayes noticed was the smell of rain where rain had no business being. The orbital cathedral dock hung 12,000 miles above Verath Prime, sealed behind pressure glass thicker than a bank vault. Yet the air carried the wet metal scent of condensation bleeding through a pressure seam. Frost had begun to web under the upper arch, thin as spider silk and twice as unwelcome. Daniel stood at the rear of the ceremonial guard line in an olive earth expeditionary dress jacket that still pulled wrong across the shoulders. White human male, 36, security escort, not diplomat, not hero, not anyone who belonged within 200 yards of an imperial relic. His sidearm was locked. His hands rested where everyone could see them. His orders were simple. Stand still. Look respectful. Don't become a diplomatic incident. At the far end of the Black Mirror floor, Queen Lyra Verath crossed toward the ancient ship with the whole court holding its breath around her. She moved like someone raised to make silence obey. Pastel purple skin glowed beneath the cathedral lights. Long, slender ears tapered through the fall of her silver hair, sharp and delicate as carved glass. Her crown was a thin white circlet. Her face looked almost human except for the color of starlight caught under the skin and the stillness of someone taught never to reach for anything she had already been promised. The Orolith waited in its cradle, vast and pale, half vessel and half fossilized moon. For 10,000 years, the crown had called it a warship, a throne with engines, a spear left behind by ancestors who had supposedly conquered the dark by blood and fire. Daniel looked at its hull and saw no obvious gun ports. He saw curved seams, broad lower access ramps, pressure blisters shaped like evacuation locks. Maybe that was nothing. Maybe he had spent too many years looking for exits in rooms full of speeches. Queen Lyra stepped onto the ceremonial dais and placed her palm on the royal seal. Priest engineers leaned over consoles. Counselor Mavan lifted his chin, black robes falling in perfect lines, already wearing the expression of a man ready to explain history to itself. The dock translation lattice woke above the galleries, scattering soft blue glyphs through the air. Light spread under the queen's hand. Slow, blue-white. Ancient systems stirred beneath the floor with a sound like ice cracking across a frozen lake. The nobles exhaled together. Then the light pulled away from her. It did not fail. It moved. Down the dais. Across the mirror floor. Past the royal heirs in silver collars. Past the bloodline candidates standing ready with ceremonial gauntlets. Past every person who had spent a lifetime believing worth could be inherited. The beam reached the rear guard line and climbed Daniel's boots. For one dumb second, he looked behind him. There was only polished stone, 3 terrified human diplomats, and a pressure seam dripping cold condensation onto the floor. Every rifle in the dock lifted. Daniel raised both hands slowly, palms out, elbows loose. The old checkpoint posture. The flood shelter posture. The don't let a scared room decide too fast posture. Easy, he said, not loud. Nobody moved too fast. His eyes caught movement near the left stabilizer rail. A young apprentice technician stood under a hanging brace, staring at the ship instead of the frost creeping across the joint above him. The brace shifted a quarter inch. Daniel's stomach tightened before politics had time to matter. Queen Lyra turned toward him, her face still enough to cut glass. The Orolith opened its command bridge, not toward her, but toward him. The translation lattice flickered, stealing meaning from the ship's impossible voice and shaping it into Terran English too clean to be human. Guardian recognized. Daniel did not lower his hands. He looked from the rifles to the loose brace and took one careful breath. "Ma'am," he said to the queen, "your ceremony's about to drop 80 pounds of metal on that kid." For half a second, nobody moved except the brace. It shifted again over the apprentice technician with a faint metallic tick, the kind of small sound Daniel had learned to trust more than alarms. Alarms came after someone had already ignored the small sounds. Counselor Meven's gaze cut from Daniel to the stabilizer rail and back again, irritation sharpening the edges of his face. "The human will remain still," he said. "No one approaches the vessel during recognition instability." Daniel kept his palms up. The beam from the orolith warmed his chest through the stiff dress jacket, but the rest of the dock felt suddenly cold. 30 rifles watched his fingers. The young technician watched the ancient ship. The brace watched gravity. Daniel swallowed once. That kid's got maybe 10 seconds. Maven lifted his slate as if recording could make danger behave. "Security will assess." "Security's looking at me." Queen Lyra's eyes moved, not to Daniel first, but to the upper joint. Frost had thickened around the pressure seam. Condensation gathered on the brace bolts and trembled there. Her expression did not change, yet something behind it recalculated. "Captain Soren." The captain broke from the royal line before the second syllable finished. "Pearl armor." Compact stride. One hand already signaling 2 guards to hold their aim instead of tightening it. Daniel waited until Soren was halfway across the mirror floor. Waiting cost him 3 seconds. Running would have cost the room more. "I'm moving slow," he said. Nobody gets excited. Maven snapped. "You do not instruct my guard." Daniel took 1 step, palms still visible. "Then tell them not to shoot the guy under the falling part." The brace slipped. Not a dramatic collapse. A tired surrender. Daniel stepped under it and caught the lower edge with his left hand, turning his bad shoulder away from the load as much as he could. Pain lit up behind his collarbone, old and white, from a floodwall rescue outside Salinas that had never healed right because paperwork had moved faster than doctors. 80 pounds of ceremonial alloy dragged his arm down. Soren reached him a breath later and took the far side. Her armor servos whined softly as she absorbed the weight. The apprentice finally looked up. His pastel purple face emptied of color. Daniel kept his voice flat. "Knee first. Crawl toward the captain's boots." The technician stared. "I can stand." "Great. Do that somewhere else." Soren shifted her stance, boots scraping against the slick black floor. Together they lowered the brace sideways, inch by inch, until it settled with a dull, harmless thud. No sparks. No shattered relic. No glorious rescue from Urals. Just metal placed where it could stop threatening a kid. Daniel stepped back at once and raised his hands again, breathing through his nose so the shoulder pain stayed off his face. "There," he said. "Ceremony saved." Nobody laughed. One human diplomat at the rear looked like he might faint from gratitude or terror. The apprentice clutched his wrist seal and whispered something in Varathi too fast for the lattice to catch. Soren looked at Daniel for 1 clean second. Not friendly. Not grateful. Measuring. Then she turned to Lyra. "The brace was failing, Your Majesty." Meven's jaw tightened. "Because the human disrupted the awakening field." Daniel glanced up at the frostweb joint. "That bolt was sweating before your ship started flirting with me." Half the rifles twitched. He shut his mouth a little too late. Queen Lyra descended 1 step from the dais. The beam from the orolith did not follow her. It stayed on Daniel, brighter now, pulsing once where his hand still hovered near the fallen brace. The dock translation lattice flickered, but the ship said nothing more. It did not need to. Lyra looked from the apprentice to the brace, from the brace to Daniel's raised hands, then to the ancient vessel that had chosen its moment only after a life had been protected. "Counselor," she said, voice calm enough to make the court lean in, "if sabotage has occurred, we will prove it properly." Maven bowed with the stiffness of a man swallowing a blade. "Verification circle, then." Daniel flexed his aching fingers once and stopped when a guard noticed. "That sounds optional." Lyra held his gaze. "It is not. Figured. You will enter the circle. No restraints unless you reach for a weapon." Daniel looked at the glowing rings etched into the floor before the orolith, then at the apprentice being guided away by Soren. The kid was alive. The room was still armed. Politics had survived long enough to become dangerous again. "All right," Daniel said. "Let's keep everybody calm and disappointed." He walked toward the circle with his hands visible, passing nobles who leaned away as if humanity were contagious. Behind him, the fallen brace lay flat on the mirror floor. Ahead of him, the orolith opened a narrow seam of green light, patient as a door that already knew what kind of man would step through it. The verification circle looked less like a machine than a verdict somebody had polished for 10,000 years. 3 rings of pale metal lay inlaid beneath the black mirror floor, each one etched with ancient Varathi script and tiny sensor nodes that blinked like cold stars. Daniel stepped into the center because Queen Lyra had asked without raising her voice, and because every other option in the dock had more rifles attached to it. The floor chilled through his boots. A thin band of light climbed his legs, paused at his chest, then spread across his shoulders in a silent grid. Not heat, not pain, more like being measured by a room that did not care what he called himself. Maven stood outside the outer ring with his slate raised. Verification sequence initiated under royal authority. Subject, Sergeant Daniel Hayes, human military escort, no blood claim, no interface privilege, suspected contamination vector. Daniel looked down at the glowing ring. That last part sounds expensive. Silence. Sure. He shut his mouth. Sometimes the smartest thing a man could do in court was stop helping. Priest engineers adjusted the consoles around the dais. Above them, the dock translation lattice flickered as it tried to interpret old systems waking under newer ceremonial code. One engineer frowned. The scan is not mapping bloodline markers. Meven's eyes sharpened. Clarify. It is indexing stress response, attention priority, motor decision sequencing. The engineer swallowed when the counselor turned fully toward him. Possibly an archaic Guardian protocol. A rustle moved through the noble galleries. Queen Lyra did not look away from Daniel. He wished she would. He had been looked at by commanders before, by review boards, by civilians whose names he could not keep and still could not forget. This felt worse. Older. Cleaner. Like the ship was not asking whether he was innocent, but whether he was useful in the kind of moment innocence rarely survived. Maven snapped his fingers. Bring the candidates. 3 royal heirs entered one by one, each wearing a ceremonial gauntlet bright with lineage seals. The first, Lord Valor, touched the outer ring with perfect posture. The Orlith stayed dim. The second, a silver-haired princess with a face like carved moonlight, pressed her palm against the scan field. Nothing moved except the frost crawling higher along the pressure arch. The third, a young duke with his family crest covering half his chest, pushed both hands down as if ancient metal could be bullied into agreement. The ring remained cold. Daniel shifted his weight. His bad shoulder complained. His eyes slid toward the left gallery, where attendants were clearing fallen instruments from the brace incident. One caretaker carried a tray of seal needles too close to the ring edge. Then the dock pulsed. Gravity dropped half an inch and came back crooked. Metals lifted. Robes swayed. The caretaker's foot slipped on condensation. The tray flew. Guards moved toward the queen. Maven reached for the instruments. Daniel stepped out of the circle and caught the woman by the elbow before her wrist struck the metal edge. The inner ring flared under his boot. Hands first, he said, turning her palm upward. Make sure you've still got all 10 fingers. She stared at him, breathing fast. The seal needles, don't care about the needles. They're consecrated. They don't have fingers. The Orlith ignited. Not loudly. Not theatrically. Light traveled through the 3 rings and rose behind Daniel in green-white columns. The command corridor opened another seam, wider now, deep inside the ancient hull. The translation lattice caught a fragment from the ship and broke it into plain Terran words. Priority confirmed. Meven's face went still. He broke sequence. Daniel helped the caretaker sit on the step and backed away, palms lifting again before the rifles remembered him. She was falling. The test was not complete. Daniel looked at the scattered needles, then at the woman gripping her swelling wrist. Maybe that was the test. Queen Lyra heard the insolence. She also heard the logic. Her gaze moved across the failed heirs, the cold lineage rings, the open corridor, and the human soldiers standing outside the circle because someone unimportant had needed help at the wrong time. For the first time since the Orlith woke, she looked less offended than unsettled. Maven leaned toward her. Your Majesty, this is manipulation by emergency behavior. Lyra's eyes stayed on Daniel. No, she said softly. It is a pattern. The corridor opened wider after Lyra called it a pattern. No one in the dock seemed ready for that word. Patterns could be studied. Patterns could become evidence. Maven understood it too. Daniel saw the counselor's fingers tighten around the slate like he wanted to crush the data before it learned to speak. The Orlith did not wait for permission. Green light ran along the seam in its hull and unfolded a passage warm enough to fog the cold air around the verification circle. Daniel stayed where he was, palms still half raised, shoulder aching, one boot outside the ring. I'm guessing that's for me. Lyra stepped down from the dais. It is for both of us. Maven moved fast for a man wrapped in ceremony. Your Majesty, no sovereign enters an active relic interior without consecration guard. Then send one guard. The vessel has not authorized armed entry. Captain Soren tried one careful step toward the corridor. The passage lights dimmed. She stopped without being ordered. Daniel looked at Lyra. It's got boundaries. It has arrogance. Might be a family trait. Soren's face did not change, but her eyes dropped for half a second. Lyra noticed. Daniel wished she had not. The queen crossed to the corridor's edge and waited for him to move first. He did not. Instead, he stepped aside and gave her the open path. The aurolith dimmed again. Not anger. Correction. Daniel sighed through his nose. Okay, it's got opinions and manners. Lyra's jaw tightened, but she stepped beside him rather than ahead or behind. The corridor accepted the geometry. Its light steadied. Together they entered the ancient ship, leaving rifles, nobles, and Maven's polished outrage behind them. The door sealed without a sound. Inside, the aurolith did not smell like a warship. Daniel had known troop carriers that smelled of old sweat, hot wiring, sealed ammunition, and recycled fear. This place smelled faintly of mineral water, dry linen, and air kept clean for people too weak to complain. The first chamber curved around them in soft white tiers. Small alcoves lined the walls, each padded with pale material, each fitted with gentle straps no wider than Daniel's thumb. Lyra stopped beside one. Training cradles. Daniel glanced at the height, the rounded edges, the pictographs showing adult hands securing a tiny body. Nursery pods. Her eyes cut to him. You read Ancient Verathi now? Above the alcove, the dock translation lattice flickered through a thin relay beam, catching symbols from the ship and rendering them in Terran English too clean, too formal, too late. Infant stabilization birth. Daniel kept his hands away from the pod. No. I read what people build when they're scared their kids won't make the trip. The next door opened. Not a bridge. A cryo corridor. Cells ran in long silent rows, arranged by body size rather than rank. Infant. Child. Adult. Elder. Medical symbols glowed along the glass, dim but alive. Lyra walked slower now. The silver mantle trailing from her shoulders brushed dust that had waited 10,000 years for someone to stop lying about it. The royal histories named this level the spear deck. Daniel studied the broad ramps, the floor arrows, the recessed handholds built low enough for children. Bad name. Careful, Sergeant. Trying to be. He pointed with two fingers, not touching. No weapons lockers. No targeting stations. No hardpoints. I've seen troop ships. I've seen evac carriers. This is closer to the second one. A pulse moved through the wall, and another chamber opened. Seed banks. Folded habitat frames. Water reclamation cores. Medical bays with enough beds for a city that had run out of ground. Along the far wall, thousands of names had been carved in different scripts, some elegant, some jagged, some cut so deeply the metal had warped around grief. Lyra stood beneath them, crown bright in the green light. For the first time, she looked less like a queen inside her inheritance and more like a daughter finding a locked room in her own house. The ship projected two words through the translation lattice, first in ancient Verathi, then in Terran English. Sanctuary route. Daniel let the word sit there. Maven would have called it contamination. The court would have called it heresy. The ship called itself a shelter. Lyra looked back toward the sealed corridor, toward the dock full of witnesses waiting for a warship to validate their blood. Then what did my line inherit? Daniel looked at the nursery pods, the seed banks, the low arrows meant for children, and kept his answer small enough not to become a lecture. Maybe something you were supposed to protect, not point at someone. The aurolith did not open the memory core with ceremony. It did it the way old machines did honest work, without asking if anyone was ready. The sanctuary route dimmed. The seed banks blurred at the edges. A low pulse moved through the floor and climbed Daniel's boots. Not painful, not gentle, the same measuring chill from the verification circle returning with a deeper purpose. Lyra saw thin bands of green-white light cross his hands, his chest, the scar hidden under his collar where his old shoulder injury pulled tight. "What is it doing?" she asked. Daniel did not answer right away. His eyes had fixed on nothing visible. The translation lattice flickered above the chamber and rendered one fragment in Terran English. "Guardian scan, stress memory echo." "Great," Daniel muttered. "Because that's not invasive." The ship took the room away. The seed vault folded into a school gymnasium under emergency lights. Wet coats hanging from bleachers, folding cots lined across a basketball court, a scoreboard frozen at midnight. The air smelled of rainwater, diesel, burned coffee, and floor wax rubbed thin by too many scared feet. Lyra stood beside Daniel inside the echo, untouched by it and trapped in it all the same. A younger Daniel moved through the gym in a soaked rescue jacket, no gray at his temples yet, one hand pressed to an earpiece spitting static. "Command says pull out." A voice crackled from somewhere above. "Floodwall's gone in 6 minutes." The younger Daniel looked toward the exit, where buses waited under hard rain, then toward a basement stairwell marked cleared with orange tape. He stared at the tape too long. "Scanner missed something," he said. "Hayes, that floor is done." He tore the tape down and went downstairs. Lyra watched without speaking. The stairwell filled to his knees. No spectacle, no glory, just floating crayons, a backpack caught on a railing, a red lunchbox bumping softly against the wall. From below came a child's voice, thin enough to slip through concrete. Daniel's jaw locked beside her. The older Daniel did not look away, but he stopped breathing through his mouth. "How many?" Lyra asked, because numbers were safer than pity. "9," he said. "Too fast." That time, the gym vanished. A transport corridor replaced it, narrow and dim, oxygen alarms pulsing amber along the ceiling. The younger Daniel stood before 2 sealed doors with 2 breathing masks in his hand. Behind one door, a pressure bay held civilians packed shoulder to shoulder. Behind the other, a storage compartment flashed one uncertain heat signature. "Person. Battery. Glitch. No time to know." A red countdown slid down the bulkhead. 5, 4, 3. The younger Daniel gave both masks to the pressure bay and sealed the larger door. The small heat signature faded. No scream. No dramatic collapse. Just a red dot going dark on a dirty screen. Lyra felt the silence after it. It was heavier than accusation. The memory broke apart, returning them to the sanctuary chamber, to the seed banks and carved names and air that had waited 10,000 years. Daniel's hand had curled into a fist so tight his knuckles had gone white. The Oralith placed a command glyph before him, glowing at chest height, close enough for a man to claim if he needed the pain to mean something. He did not touch it. Lyra understood then why he had flinched from being chosen. Chosen men were expected to stand clean inside impossible choices. Daniel carried his like wet clothes under the skin. "The scan is not measuring victory," she said quietly. He gave a short breath that was almost a laugh and not close to one. "Good. I'm short on that." "Then what is it measuring?" Daniel looked at the nearest empty cryo cradle. Dust lay across the glass in a thin gray veil. He reached toward it, stopped before his fingers touched, and let his hand fall. "What you do when there isn't enough of anything," he said. "Time. Air. Hands. Forgiveness." The last word came out lower than the rest, like it had slipped past him without clearance. Lyra could have offered a royal answer. Duty. Sacrifice. Honor. All the clean words courts used to keep pain off the furniture. She chose none of them. "And what do you do?" Daniel looked back at the command glyph waiting for his hand. "You save who's in reach," he said. "Then you carry the rest without making it their burden." The Oralith brightened around them, not triumphant, not merciful, but certain. Queen Lyra looked at the human soldier who had been offered the heart of her ancient ship and had answered by refusing to make grief into a crown. The Oralith's certainty lasted for seconds. Then the sanctuary chamber shuddered under their feet. Not the clean pulse of recognition. This one came crooked, dragged through the walls from somewhere outside the ship, and it made the empty cryo cradles rattle in their frames. Daniel turned toward the sealed corridor. The command glyph still glowed beside him, waiting. He ignored it. That came from the dock. Lyra had already crossed to a wall panel half hidden behind carved names. Ancient symbols woke under her palm, then stuttered. "Mavan." She did not say it like accusation. She said it like diagnosis. The ship opened a projection in the air between them. The cathedral dock rendered in blue-white lines, the court reduced to heat signatures, pressure curves, and moving clusters of panic. At the royal seal dais, Counselor Mavan stood with 6 priest engineers around the auxiliary rings. 3 royal candidates pressed ceremonial gauntlets into the outer seals while power streamed away from the dock floor in jagged pulses. The Orlith refused the bond. The dock did not know how to refuse the strain. Daniel leaned closer. Those rings tied into the ship. Lyra's face tightened. No, the stabilizer grid. They were meant to align the dock around the vessel during awakening. So he's pulling on the wrong system. He is proving the bloodline in front of the court. He's proving your building needs a lockout. Another pulse hit. Gravity dipped, came back uneven, and dust lifted from the nursery pods in a slow silver sheet. On the projection, nobles grabbed railings. Human diplomats crouched beside a column. A lower gallery door jammed halfway, trapping attendants and kitchen staff behind a ceremonial security field. Red numbers crawled across the upper arch. Daniel pointed. What's that? Lyra read the ancient script before the translation lattice caught up. Oxygen partial pressure. How bad? She calculated without blinking. Queens could do math, while empires watched them bleed. Uncomfortable in 9 minutes. Dangerous sooner for children, elders, anyone injured. Daniel's eyes moved over the map. Routes. 3 locked by ceremony protocol. Gravity. Unstable in the outer galleries. Medical holds. She looked at him then. He had not asked how to claim the ship. He had not asked what the command glyph made him. He was counting exits. Air. Wait. Injured first. The pattern was so plain it cut through 10,000 years of training. The command seat can override all of it, she said. Daniel glanced toward the corridor ahead, where a pale command chamber had opened in silence. He looked back at the map. Not what I asked. Lyra placed her hand near the auxiliary field. It stayed dark. The Orlith had shown her truth, not command. A small breath escaped her before she could armor it. Daniel looked away from it, giving the wound privacy. I need plain language, he said. No relic poetry. No lineage ceremony. White marks for breathable routes, hazard marks, medical symbols. What means what? Another gravity wave rolled through the projection. In the lower gallery, an elderly noble slid down a wall. A young attendant tried to lift him and failed because the floor would not keep the same weight twice. Lyra reached up and removed the thin white circlet from her head. Without it, her long pointed ears looked less like regalia and more like bone and skin under stress. She placed the crown on the floor beside an empty cryo cradle so both hands were free. White arrows are sanctuary routes, she said. 3 dots mark medical hold. Broken ring means gravity hazard. Blue line means breathable pressure. Red lattice means ceremonial lock. Daniel nodded. Good. We open white first. The court will see you use guardian access. They'll see people breathing. That is not the same thing politically. Never is. He stepped to the command glyph and stopped 1 inch short. He did not touch it until she met his eyes. You translate. I route. If the ship lets you confirm, you confirm. If it doesn't, you tell me where I'm about to make it worse. Lyra held his gaze for half a heartbeat, then placed both hands into the auxiliary light. The field did not obey her alone. Daniel set his palm to the glyph. This time, the Orlith answered both shapes. His command. Her language. The emergency map brightened. Open Sanctuary Route 1, Daniel said. Lyra spoke the old words, not as ritual, but as work. Across the projection, the first locked corridor turned green. The first locked corridor turned green on the emergency map, and the dock changed before the court understood who had changed it. On the projection, white sanctuary arrows lit across the black mirror floor outside. Simple enough for a frightened child, clear enough for an old man losing air. The lower gallery hesitated. Ceremony had trained them to wait for permission even when oxygen thinned. Then Captain Soren stepped into the open path, lowered her rifle, and pointed with 2 fingers. Move. That word did more than any him. Attendants lifted the elderly noble from the wall. Human diplomats guided 2 Varathi clerks beneath a pressure arch. A child in a silver collar stumbled, looked around for the correct adult, and found a glowing arrow instead. She followed it. Daniel kept his palm on the command glyph, eyes locked on the emergency map. Blue pressure lines. Red ceremony locks. Amber gravity hazards. moving heat marks with no names attached, because Crisis did not care who had inherited what. Lyra stood beside him with both hands inside the auxiliary field, translating old emergency phrases into commands the ship would accept. Her crown remained on the floor beside the cryo cradle. Neither of them looked at it. Gallery 2 is dragging, Daniel said. Outer rail gravity's still high. Lyra read the script racing along the wall. It requires sovereign confirmation. Can you give it? Not alone. Then don't. He shifted his hand half an inch to the left, leaving a clean gap in the light. Not surrender. Space. Lyra placed her hand into that gap. The Orlith paused, as if weighing the shape of shared authority, then accepted it. Gravity in Gallery 2 dropped to 0.7. On the feed, people stopped crawling and began moving on their feet. Daniel nodded once. Medical holds. Lyra spoke the old words. Three-dot symbols opened across the map. Beds unfolded from the dock walls. Breathing masks dropped from recessed panels. A priest engineer's voice burst through the calm, thin with outrage. You are diverting oxygen from the coronation archive. Daniel leaned toward the field. Do the relics breathe? Static answered. Lyra translated the reroute before anyone could wrap the objection in tradition. Clean air pushed into the lower corridors. The blue line steadied. Daniel's shoulder trembled under the command load. He flexed his fingers once, then pressed his palm flat again. The Orlith offered deeper access, branching channels blooming beneath his skin, but he did not follow them. West's service spine is jammed, he said. Can maintenance drones wedge it? Lyra checked the hazard marks. They are ceremonial polish units. Can they push? Barely. Barely counts. She released them. Tiny silver machines skittered across the feed, absurd and determined, bracing under the stuck panel until the gap widened enough for staff to crawl through. Daniel watched the first cook emerge, then a cleaning worker, then a boy carried under one arm by a woman half his size. Good, he said softly. Next bottleneck. Meven's voice cut through the calm. Your Majesty, you are allowing a foreign soldier to exercise sovereign infrastructure. Lyra's hands did not leave the auxiliary field. I am allowing people to leave a failing dock. History will not separate those things. Daniel did not look away from the map. History can stand in line. For the first time, Lyra almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was useful. She opened the lower staff galleries herself, old words sharp and steady in her mouth. Green spread through the map in uneven blooms. Not triumph. Movement. Not conquest. Exit. Daniel kept sending power outward, into air, gravity, arrows, and medical holds. Lyra watched the oldest vessel in her empire obey a man who refused to pull anything toward himself. Rulers gathered rooms around their names. Daniel Hayes had been handed command and used it like a crowbar, prying open space for everyone else. The lower staff galleries turned green one by one, and for one breath the emergency map looked almost peaceful. White arrows carried people toward air. Blue pressure lines steadied around evacuation routes. Amber gravity warnings shrank into corners where no heat marks still moved. Daniel kept his palm on the command glyph, shoulders shaking hard now, jaw set like he could hold the dock together by refusing to blink. Lyra stood beside him with both hands in the auxiliary field, old emergency words still warm in her mouth. Her crown remained on the floor behind them beside the empty cryo cradle, a small white circle stripped of every speech ever made about it. Then the Orlith opened the memory core. Not toward Daniel. Toward her. The emergency map blurred. The sanctuary chamber dissolved into gold-white dust, and Lyra found herself standing beneath a sky she did not know, on a shoreline city breaking apart without explosions. Salt wind cut across her face. Sirens folded into the sound of waves. Ancient Varathi moved through evacuation lanes, not in armor, not beneath banners, but carrying water filters, seed cases, sleeping infants, medical packs, and elders wrapped in gray blankets. No triumph murals, no conquest chants, just a crowd counting ships and realizing there were not enough. Lyra turned and saw the Orlith before legend had ruined it. It rested in a cliffside dry dock, unfinished, its lower ramps wide enough for stretchers, its belly open to receive the sick, the young, the frightened, the useful and useless alike. Engineers painted white sanctuary arrows by hand because the printers had failed. A woman with ash on her pastel purple face passed a child to a stranger and did not ask for bloodline. The memory shifted. A council chamber. Not royal marble. Concrete. Emergency lights. Leaders argued over who would command the vessel, whose families would board first, whose name would sit above the launch record. At the center stood a young engineer holding a cracked data core against her chest. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. "If we give survival to kings," she said, "they'll make mercy wear a crown." An older man snapped. "Then who holds command?" The engineer looked through the chamber window toward the evacuation ramps, where strangers carried each other because rank had become too heavy to lift. Someone who won't want to. The memory struck Lyra harder than accusation. The Orlith had not been built to crown the worthy. It had been built to defend the helpless from the worthy. Its ancient protocols were not loyalty oaths. They were refusals. Refusal to abandon the unseen. Refusal to mistake ownership for duty. Refusal to let shelter become another throne. Lyra came back to the sanctuary chamber with a sharp breath. Daniel had not noticed. He was routing the final injured group through a maintenance spine barely 4 feet wide. "Can adults fit through that?" he asked. Lyra swallowed. "If they crawl, then they crawl. Ventilation. Stable for 7 minutes. Enough if nobody gets proud." Meven's voice broke through the calm, thin with controlled panic. "Your Majesty, remove the human from command before the court mistakes necessity for legitimacy." Lyra looked at her crown on the floor, then at Daniel's hand on the glyph, then at the white arrows carrying her people out by need instead of name. She touched the auxiliary field. Her voice traveled through every open corridor in the dock. "Let them mistake it." Silence answered first, then movement. Daniel glanced sideways at her. "That's going to cost you." "Yes." "You sure?" Lyra looked toward the memory core, where the ancient engineer's words still burned somewhere behind the walls. "No." Her hand stayed in the light anyway. "Open the last route." The Orlith brightened around them, not triumphant, not obedient, but relieved, as if after 10,000 years someone had finally stopped calling mercy by the name of conquest. The last route refused to open cleanly. On the emergency map, the maintenance spine flashed amber, then red, then a stubborn pulsing white that meant the Orlith was trying and the dock was still arguing with itself. Somewhere beyond the sanctuary chamber, metal complained in a long, controlled groan. Daniel leaned closer to the command glyph, blue-white light crawling up his wrist. "Come on," he muttered. "Don't get ceremonial on me now." Lyra set both hands into the auxiliary field. Her crown remained on the floor behind her, untouched beside the empty cryo cradle. She spoke the old emergency phrase once, then again with the clipped precision of someone cutting wire in the dark. The Orlith answered through the walls. The maintenance spine widened by 18 inches. Not enough for dignity. Enough for people who wanted air. On the feed, attendants dropped to hands and knees, guiding elders first. A child in a silver collar crawled after a kitchen worker with one sleeve torn. A diplomat handed his jacket to a stranger so she could pad the metal edge for the next person through. No registry priority. No noble order. Just bodies making themselves smaller so other bodies could live. Daniel watched the last heat signature clear the spine before he let his shoulders lower. Route's empty. Lyra checked the pressure curve. Oxygen stabilizing. Gravity. Holding at safe variance. Medical holds. Receiving. He pulled his hand from the glyph. The light clung to his skin for one heartbeat, then withdrew. Ahead of them, the command chamber opened fully for the first time. A pale seat unfolded from the floor, not large, not jeweled, not grand in the way courts understood grandeur. It looked almost plain, built for use, not worship. The Orlith projected a phrase through the translation lattice. On completion, awaiting command posture. Daniel stared at the empty seat. "That means sit down." Lyra did not soften the answer. "Yes." Beyond the sealed hull, the court would be watching every feed that still worked. Meven's voice cut through the calm, thin with urgency dressed as law. "Your Majesty, if he completes the posture, the court will recognize foreign command over imperial legacy." Daniel glanced toward Lyra. He always picked the worst time to be accurate. Often. Rough hobby. He stepped toward the seat. The chamber brightened, expecting him. For a moment, the oldest ship in the Empire seemed to hold its breath. Daniel placed one hand on the armrest. He did not sit. His fingers rested there gently, like the seat belonged to someone injured and sleeping. "Orlith," he said. The ship dimmed the chamber lights and brightened the sanctuary arrows on the map instead. Daniel nodded, accepting the answer he had hoped for. "Final command under temporary guardian access. Take them home. All of them. Safest route, lowest risk, no registry priority. Keep the medical holds open until the last worker leaves." Meven's voice sharpened. "He refuses completion. The bond is invalid." Lyra stepped forward, mantle brushing the floor, both hands free, crown still behind her. "The bond is valid because he refuses to own what was built to shelter others." The comm went silent. Not defeated. Thinking. That was better. Daniel removed his hand from the armrest and stepped back from the seat. The Orlith accepted the vacancy. Its light moved past him, past Lyra, out through the corridors and into the dock, touching pressure masks, service uniforms, royal collars, tired hands, frightened faces, all the living proof that command had done its work by letting people leave. On one feed, Captain Soren lowered her rifle. On another, the apprentice technician from the brace incident helped an elderly woman seal her breathing mask. In the lower gallery, staff and nobles sat on the same floor because gravity no longer cared what their families had called themselves. Lyra bent to pick up her crown. She did not place it on her head. Not yet. She turned to Daniel and inclined her head, not to a ruler, not to acclaim it, but to the shape of a truth her empire had spent 10,000 years polishing into the wrong weapon. Daniel looked uncomfortable enough to be trusted. "Ma'am," he said, "you've still got people to move." Lyra held the crown at her side. "So do you, Sergeant." They walked back toward the cathedral dock together, leaving the command seat empty behind them. The Orlith's lights softened to the color of dawn over water. It had not chosen a king. It had chosen the one man who would leave the throne empty if others needed shelter more. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope this story left a quiet spark somewhere in your heart. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us which moment stayed with you most. Don't forget to subscribe to Gravity and Stardust for more emotional sci-fi stories. See you in the next journey.